So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Northeastern Region Regional Advisory Council meeting for the Division of Wildlife Resources for September 8th, 2022. My name is Brett Brevedel, and I'm the current chair of this body. I'd like to take a moment and introduce the RAC members. First, I will start. We have two new RAC members. I would like to introduce Eric Major, who's online. He is an at-large committee member. Go ahead, Eric, and introduce yourself, whatever you'd like to say.
Well, thank you, Brett. So my name's Eric Major. I live here in Roosevelt. I have a wonderful patient wife and 3 little boys. Just enjoy the outdoors and grateful to be able to participate.
And I'd also like to introduce Mallory Harrison. She is our agricultural representative. Nick Bess is no longer on the RAC, and Mallory is replacing him in that position. Would you like to say anything, Mallory?
Meet everybody and be here. I farm and dairy farm in Cousin Valley's High Pine, and I also enjoy the outdoors and using our resources. So I'm happy to be here and be a part of the process.
Thank you. We're glad to have you.
Tosh Mather, I work with Ashley National Forest. And I'm Rebecca Jones, and I represent non-consumptive wildlife users.
Richie Anderson, agriculture. Brad Horrocks, elected. Position. Jump right in here, Pat.
I'm Pat Ringgold. I'm the Habitat Program Manager here with DWR.
Jeff Daly-Gucci, I represent Sportsman. Daniel Davis, Sportsman.
Jessica Carpenter, the Rockville Office BLM.
Thank you. I believe that's all that's good. We've got just about everybody here tonight. Appreciate your attendance. I'd also like to welcome Wade Heaton from the Walleye Board. I see he's online. Wade.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, go ahead, Wade.
No, I was just going to say thank you. Good to be with you tonight.
And I'd like to thank all the DWR personnel who have traveled all over to attend these meetings. And I see some landowners that have come a long ways today too. I do have a message that Joe is trying to log in. If you guys can work on that. Thank you. And with that, we will begin. Joe Arnold has joined. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself, Joe? We just barely started.
Hi, yes, Joe Arnold, representing the public.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is start with approval of the agenda that you have in front of you for tonight's meeting. We have a motion. I'd make that motion. Second. Motion second. By showing there are 2 people online, and I will probably call your name individually for a yes or a no, and then with the number of people we have here, we'll go with raised hands tonight. All those in favor? Joe? Eric?
Yes.
So you raise your hand. Thank you. Now we go to item number 3, which is a wildlife board meeting update. I have a summary of the motions that were approved by the wildlife boards. There was some discussion similar to what we had here, Jeff, that you initiated about the alligators and guides. We were talking about the WMAs and whether they needed to be licensed or what the rules were. And we had a similar discussion at the wildlife board meeting. And it was kind of an education process like we had here, like who regulates what, and who can actually regulate guides. But the motion that came out of Randy Durrett, and it was passed unanimously, is to ask the division to look into the guides and outfitters obtaining special use permits on the WMAs. and to look at implementing a fee for non-consumptive users of WMAs. And then this is to be placed on the action log, so it'll be ongoing, that they are looking at that.
Okay.
The proposed fee schedule came up. Well, the rest of the WMA proposal was approved as presented unanimously by the board. And then there was some discussion of the fee, just the cost of licenses, the fee structure. And most of it stayed the same, but there was a motion that that passed unanimously that was to raise the non-resident 18-year-old to 64-year-old hunting license to $120. That's the license that non-residents apply before they can apply for a big game permit. And the non-resident combination license, which achieves the same thing, was raised to $150. I don't remember exactly what the recommendation was, but they raised them up slightly. And to leave the non-resident youth licenses as proposed. So adult non-resident licenses were raised. The remainder of the fee schedule was passed as presented. And there was a motion to adjust the cost on the spot and stock cougar permit down to $10 and make it an option during purchase as a visible flat, offer. The intent there is to sell more spot and stock cougar tags, just as an opportunity for hunters. And the end of the data, the last 2 years, 1 year had 6 cougars taken and 1 year had 7 statewide. So the feeling was it would be an opportunity for people to have some excitement, carry a different license without really having any biological impact on the cougar population. There's so few that have been successful spot and stock. The next motion was regarding the dedicated hunter hours, the cost of buying out. And I believe the motion that the Wildlife Board made matched our motion locally exactly. The one that they passed unanimously was that they set the buyout amount for the dedicated hunter program at $25 for the first 16 hours and $40 for the remaining 16. That was there's quite a low cost. There's been quite a group of dedicated hunters just buying their hours rather than doing any work. And so the incentive there was to make it a little more costly so people will hopefully participate in the projects. But if somebody was just short a few hours, they didn't want to charge them the full rate. So 25 for the first half, 3 hour for the second half. Remainder of the fee schedule, as I mentioned, was passed unanimously, and then we had an audit of the expo permits and the proposed expo permit allocations coming up. They were both passed unanimously. The division made a recommendation for drought permits. This year it was very minor compared to last year, and I believe it was just bison, right? So they're increasing with the Henry Mountains. Right. There was a slight increase of Henry Mountain bison permits due to the drought, and no other recommendations of increased tags this fall, and that passed unanimously. Then there was a motion. I don't know either of the individuals, but the motion was to replace Joe Ferry with Randy Elliott on the CWMU advisory board. So Randy Elliott representative. That's a summary of what happened at the Wildlife Board. Pat is filling in for Miles tonight, and he's going to give us a regional update.
Sure, and I don't have a PowerPoint to go with this, so my apologies. We've been very busy with the hunts coming on and then fall season, getting close to winter. our habitat section, we've completed 9 new guzzlers in the Book Cliff Summer Range to help with water out there and better animal distribution. We've been doing some weed spraying on our Montez and Stewart Lake WMAs for some upland renovation projects, upland game species. We're looking at a couple of aspen rejuvenation projects on the Book Cliff Divide, as well as the Current Creek area over in Wasatch County. Our outreach section had a really cool event this past weekend. They had a wild game cooking clinic. We had about 60 attendees, UDWR staff, and dedicated hunters to help out with that. We're going to put that together, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so the public can get these recipes and some really cool ideas. And the favorite dish that night was tongue pastrami. So, September 17th, the Kokanee viewing day up at Sheep Creek, Flaming Gorge, for the event at the event point. September 24th, we're having the Unit Basin Youth Pheasant Hunt at the Pleasant Valley Hunting Reserve in Mighton. The registration for that is not open yet, but it will be in a few days, and that will also be on Eventbrite. Our aquatic section, the native fish crew is doing young and deer surveys. They're seeing Colorado pike minnow. It's great to see. Really excited about that. Creek treatment was completed last week. Cutthroat trout, and our North Slope Three Corners. That's the wrong section, sorry. So we've got a wildlife now. We're looking at our North Slope Three Corners biologist, leaving for another job next month. So we're filling that position pretty soon. Our crews found yellow-billed cuckoo near Wyaskick Bottom for the first time in a few years. So that's kind of neat. We put out the sign and wing barrels for the grouse hunts. We're getting lots of forest grouse harvested on opening weekend. People are using those barrels. We appreciate that. Our pronghorn classification has been completed. The vernal unit again had a high buck to doe ratio. We've had a few nuisance bears in the region and no major incidents. Completed our bighorn surveys at Flaming Gorge. Of course, everyone knows the fall hunts are on and started. Finally, our youth chukar hunt will be held on September 17th.
Thank you. Any questions for the division, the RAC? Public have any questions about what's going on or anything you've seen that you have questions about? Okay, thank you for that. We will go to item number 5, which is fishing recommendations. Randy up there is joining us online. And what I'd like you to do, Randy, I know it was a long presentation, and so I'm not asking you for all the changes, but if you want to just summarize the direction we're going with some of these changes, that'd be fine, or whatever you would like to add.
Okay, thanks for that, Brett. Yeah, I'll provide maybe a quick summary of the changes we're proposing in the Northeastern region, and then maybe I'll touch quickly on some changes that might potentially affect this region, but they're more maybe some statewide kind of things. But I'll try to be brief. I don't want to rehash the entire presentation. I think in total, we went through about maybe 30 regulations or so this year. These we're proposing changes for. I counted them earlier. I think 9 of them affect the Northeastern region. Actually, it's probably a few more than that. Those are just region-specific ones. But the first one was a perch regulation change at Big Sandwash Reservoir, where we're basically proposing dropping the limit from the current 50 fish down to 10 fish. And basically our rationale for that, so we've seen the perch population collapse in Big Sandwash in recent years, and we're looking at just reducing harvest to help rebuild that population. The next one is another one at Big Sandwash Reservoir, but this one is a walleye regulation change. And currently the regulation is 10 fish with only one over 24 inches, and we're proposing going up to 20 fish of any size. The reason that we're making that recommendation is sorry about that. I accidentally muted myself when I was.
You got the attention of the IT people really quick around here.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Randy, your previous microphone sounded a lot better.
Let's try that, Paul. Does that work better?
Awesome, huge improvement. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I don't know why it switched mics on me, but anyway, yeah, just technical errors, I guess. Anyway, I'll just kind of start over on this one. We've got a second regulation change. We're proposing a big sand wash reservoir, and that's related to walleye within the reservoir. The current walleye limit is 10 fish with only one over 24 inches. We're proposing increasing that up to 20 walleye. The reason we're making that recommendation is we've seen walleye numbers really increase in big sand wash in recent years, and we're really concerned about the population collapsing, more or less them stripping themselves out of resources. Part of that's related to the fact that yellow perch numbers are down, which is related to the previous regulation change. But what we're hoping to do is increase the harvest of walleye at the reservoir, help reduce their numbers a little bit, help prevent a potential population collapse from occurring. So we're looking to get the number down to a more sustainable, more balanced level that could persist long term. The next regulation change is a pretty simple one. It's at Brown Duck Basin. Right now, Brown Duck Basin is closed to angling from January 1st through 6 a.m. on the second Saturday of July every year. We're proposing it opening up to access 365 days a year, just to increase angler access to that basin. The next one is at Jones Hole Creek. Currently at Jones Hole Creek, anglers can keep 2 trout, and only one of them could be a brown trout that's over 15 inches. What we're basically proposing is going up to a 4 trout limit on Jones Hole Creek, and that's based on our population data showing there's a fairly robust population of fish in Jones Hole Creek. It's to sustain some additional harvest. On top of that, we're concerned about numbers long term there, and we would like to maybe see some additional harvest just to improve population health. As part of our proposal, there's currently an artificial fly and lure regulation or restriction at Jones Hole Creek. We're proposing that continues, so we're just changing the limit of fish under our proposal. The next one's at Pelican Lake. This is a common carp regulation change. So currently anglers have the opportunity to release common carp to the catch. What we're trying to institute is a catch and kill order for common carp at Pelican Lake. As you know, common carp are starting to come back in Pelican Lake, and we were looking at maybe a multifaceted approach at knocking their numbers down a little bit. We've done some things like introduce tiger muskie into the reservoir. We've also been doing some mechanical removal ourselves as an agency. What a catch and kill order would do is basically empower anglers to remove some additional carp from the lake to help knock that population down. The next one is another Pelican Lake one. This is a bullhead limit increase. So the current limit is 24 fish. We proposed increasing it up to 50 fish. And the reason we're making that recommendation is we just see good numbers of bullhead in the lake, and we think there's some capacity there to increase the harvest just to provide some additional opportunities for anglers. The next one's at Starvation Reservoir. This one, currently the limit for bluegill, green sunfish, black crop, and yellow perch is 20 fish, and that's a combined total across those 4 species. We are proposing that we decrease that down to a 10 fish limit. We're making that recommendation because we've seen numbers of those fish decrease in recent years, and we're looking at reducing harvest just to build their numbers up. A side benefit of that is those fish are the forage source for walleye in that reservoir. So if we reduce harvest on all those forage fish, hopefully it'll bolster their numbers and in turn help feed some more walleye. So also benefit the walleye fishery. So we think that there's kind of 2 benefits to this regulation we're proposing. The next one is West Fork of Duchesne River. Currently, there's some special regulations that apply on the West Fork of Duchesne from a stretch from North Fork upstream to the headwaters. What we're basically proposing is moving that stretch where those special regulations apply upstream a little bit to be from the confluence of Wolf Creek up to the headwaters. The last one for the region is on Wolf Creek. Currently, there's some special regulations on Wolf Creek. So the current limit's 4 trout, only 2 maybe cutthroat trout or trout with cutthroat markings. What we basically are proposing is we go up to just a limit of 4 trout total. So regardless of species, with no gear restriction and no seasonal closure on Wolf Creek. And we're basing that recommendation off the fact that we have large numbers of fish inside of Wolf Creek. There aren't really a lot of cutthroat to protect anyway. So we think it's a creek that could provide some additional fish harvest opportunities. So we're looking at providing that. The last regulation I'll touch on really fast because it affects some waters within the region is related to round-tailed chub. So currently round-tailed chub are a species that is prohibited for anglers to actually possess. So they have to immediately release a fish if they catch a fish. Basically what we're proposing is the idea of reclassifying round-tailed chub as a sport fish species. We're making that recommendation off a couple of lines here. The first one is, first off, numbers of them. We feel that even though they are a species of greatest conservation need, we feel that numbers are robust enough that they can handle some angling pressure. And on top of that, we think there's an opportunity here to provide anglers just a new, unique fishing opportunity for, first off, a new species here in the state. And then secondly, round-tailed chub occupy the Colorado River, tributaries of the Colorado River, for instance, the Green River. Those aren't heavily fished rivers. So we think that there's an opportunity here to provide anglers just a new species in some unique waters of the state. And this recommendation, if it ends up being approved by the Wildlife Board, opens up, I forgot the exact number, but it's 800 or 900 miles of new fishing opportunities here in the state. So it's a pretty significant increase. Going along with that, we're recommending 3 different regulations that would be applied to our different round-tailed chub populations. The first is an artificial fly and lure regulation with a catch and release restriction. The second is an any gear with a 2-fish limit regulation for round-tailed chub. And the third one is an any gear with a catch and release regulation for round-tailed chub. And those apply to different waters in the state, where we've basically looked at the populations and we've kind of looked at our data and classified the level of harvest and the type of angling pressure that they can take. And what that does is, allows us to assign a regulation for those populations. So those are kind of the 3 regulations we're recommending.
Thank you. Quick questions from the RAC?
So,
One second, Jeff. So the process will be, we'll have questions on each topic from the RAC. There will be an opportunity to clarify what you heard or ask questions from the public without a comment card. Then we will go to comments from the RAC, and then we will go with the comment card. So that's the process we're going. If something's unclear, you're welcome to ask a question, but then most of the public, we want to comment during our, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jeff.
Yeah, fine. I kind of missed that last part. So we're on the round-tailed chub. How will you be doing creel samples or surveys, or what will it be to kind of see the usage and the access, and if they're being utilized by sportsmen?
Yeah, I think, we haven't discussed a creel survey yet. We typically use creel surveys to assess angler catch rates and numbers of fish that anglers are catching and harvesting. I think our primary means, at least initially, for round-tailed chub is going to involve just us doing our normal sampling. So a lot of electrofishing surveys, maybe some seine surveys to look at population numbers and to see how populations respond to us allowing angling. I think long-term, if this catches on and becomes popular in the state, I think there might be a need to do some creel surveys to assess the benefit they're providing for our anglers, but we haven't talked about that, at least initially. I think that's more of a long-term thing if this really catches on and becomes popular, but initially we'll just continue our standard surveys that we do.
Thank you. Jones Hole Creek. So the recommendation is to lift the fly and lure restriction. So is that correct?
I don't think so.
No, that is not correct.
4-fish harvest, but it's
Yeah,
still artificial fly and lure only.
Yes, that's right. So really the only change here is going from 2 trout limit with only one of those being a brown trout over 15 inches to 4 trout of any species, any size that anglers catch, but that artificial fly and lure restriction would remain on the creek.
Randy, I have one other comment, and I wished I would have done this last with the increase in licenses. But, it seems to me that we've done a lot for youth in hunting. We're backing youth hunts and blah, blah, blah. I would kind of question why we have to charge our youth $5. I just think that and to encourage that group of people, we do so much for youth. I think it might be something that I've been approached by several times. That $5 fee is kind of trivial, and everybody I've talked to would rather see just $1 increase and float those kids under 12 for that $5 fee, just something to think about. I'd like you to maybe consider that in the future. I know we just through license cases, and I just got hit on that by several people. So I told them I'd bring it up, and that's one of the things that I will bring up because people have asked me about it. And frankly, I'm all for having kids get into fishing without that restriction. And I think it'd be kind of awkward for law enforcement to bust a kid that didn't have a $5 license, you know. So I think it could be more pain than pleasure on that one. But I may be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing from the public. So just like to pass that on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that comment. That's outside the aquatic section. That's more in the purchasing department, but I could carry that comment on and see what they have to say or see if they can consider that down the road.
Thank you.
I have a question related to the roundtails. So what are you guys doing are you worried about the average angler being able to differentiate the roundtails from the bony tails or the humpback chubs?
I think, first off, if this is approved, we'll be accompanying this with some information that should help anglers identify the difference among the different species, very similar to we do with rainbow trout and cutthroat trout, for example. We do quite a bit of outreach on species identification. I think secondly, based on the streams that we've identified and the regulations that we have in place, more than likely, I think that it's very unlikely that anglers are going to catch anything other than roundtail. They're more abundant than some of the other species. So I think roundtail probably are the most likely thing people would encounter. But again, we'd be accompanying that with some outreach on how to identify them so people are handling fish properly, harvesting the right fish, not taking, potentially endangered or threatened species home.
Question, Randy. Where walleye have been stocked illegally in many waters, you manage them as a game fish after they get stocked illegally. Is that correct?
Oftentimes we do. What we often try to do is undertake an effort when they've been illegally stocked to try to maybe eradicate them or do something and control their numbers. But there are situations where, unfortunately, that doesn't work, or the cost of doing that is very extreme. Ferguson's requiring an entire rotenome treatment to kill an entire lake, and sometimes, depending on the situation, that's not something we're able to do. So, oftentimes we'll take some efforts, to liberalize harvest limits, or we've done some things with stocking of triploid fish to try to swamp out a population to make that population collapse. We've taken some steps often when we have an illegal introduction to extirpate that population without harming the fishery as a whole. But oftentimes, if that doesn't work, we're kind of put in a situation where we're stuck with managing that fishery. And I think Big Sand Wash is an example of that, where we're more or less, we've taken some efforts over the last 5 or 6 years to try to control that population, but we're seeing numbers increase. So it puts us in a situation where I think we're more or less forced to manage that fish, at least for now.
That's the one I'm referring to. The most recent one. It seems like there's been a long string of them over the years. But so, I'm just asking, not even trying to be critical, but why don't we just have a no limit on walleye if we don't want them in there? Why are we having that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. And, oftentimes we get into a position where no limit, if the numbers get high enough, a no limit is probably not going to eradicate that population. We're looking more at getting in a situation where we keep that population in check. One thing I can talk about a little bit is there's some interesting facets to the psychology of anglers, where it turns out there's been some studies done that if you actually put a harvest limit in place, anglers keep more fish than they do if there's no limit in place. And I think the reason for that is when you have a number out there, people will try to achieve that number. And that's part of our logic for not very often going with, a no limit kind of regulation. We put a number in place because, again, there often is greater harvest when we have that number, and anglers try to catch that number of fish.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the public on the fishing presentation?
Randy, has there ever been a proposal to the division about barbless hooks in areas like the Green River and others? And high profile lakes?
Yeah, we have not discussed that. I've never heard a formal proposal made for that. I can tell you that, that certainly would be a tool in our tool bag in situations where it might become necessary to use that, where we want to limit mortality of fish, due to excessive angling pressure and people releasing fish and, fish with hook marks, potentially dying later on. I will say, with that said, we do regular population monitoring on all of our waters. You bring up the example of the Green River. That's a water we monitor twice a year, and we're keeping constant tabs on the populations and numbers, and we're looking at trends within those populations. And in a lot of the cases, even though there might be high rates of release of fish, like in the Green River, we're not seeing population trends or numbers of fish that alarm us to the point where we think we're going to have some issues with the fishery or see a decline in fishery quality. So my point is that I think, something like a barbless regulation would be a tool in our tool bag if we were to start seeing some population impacts associated with catch and release angling. But to date, we haven't seen those impacts to a degree that we're concerned about, any population impacts or declines in just harvest opportunities or just angling opportunities or catching opportunities for people.
Well, the biggest issue that I have on the Green River are Rapalas with 3 gang hooks, because I really believe those tear up fish more than anything that is out there. I mean, I'm not against lures. I just think that maybe single barbless hook or singlets, maybe 2 hooks without the trebles. I mean, I've seen fish just mangled with the spinners and Rapalas, especially the big ones with the 3 hooks. I'm not so concerned about the flies, because I know that the studies haven't proved that the mortality is there, but I'm always concerned with as guiding on the Green River, those fish really get tore up. So I don't know, it might be something to consider. And there's a lot of people using those kind of lures at night, and that even complicates the release more, in my opinion. And so just something that I'd like the division to kind of look at in the future, if possible.
Yeah, we could definitely look at that in the future. And like I said, it's definitely a tool in our tool bag. Would be some kind of restriction on, the type of hooks used, no treble hooks or, use of barbless hooks, for example. But again, through our monitoring efforts, to date, we haven't seen a population where we believe that angling is severely, limiting that population to a degree that we think we need to go down that route. But if we see that, it's a tool in our tool bag, and it probably would be kind of a next step, because we don't want to ban fishing, but that's a more restrictive kind of tool by banning or having some kind of restrictions on the type of hooks that are being used.
Thank you.
I have one question. Are these check stations for boats? Is that ran under the fisheries department? What department's that ran under?
Yeah, that's run under the law enforcement department.
Okay, thank you.
We have one comment from the public, Tanner Carlson. Joe Arnold online. Joe Arnold has his hands up. Oh, Joe, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, yes. Would you just speak to the health of the West Fork of the Duchesne with the lighter regulations or limiting the amount of waters? I believe that's a cutthroat brood stock area. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm construing your question correctly here, so tell me if I'm kind of going astray. But we have taken some cutthroat out of West Fork of Duchesne River. We've used it in recent years as sort of a brood population to seed really what we have in Sheep Creek Lake, which is our main brood population for cutthroat trout in the area. So So we've done some occasional egg take efforts. And we kind of wound down those efforts, and then we had a winter kill at Sheep Creek Lake that forced us to revitalize those efforts when we thought we were winding them down. But our intent there is for that to be, kind of a short-term effort for the next handful of years to get Sheep Creek Lake repopulated back to being our brood source. Beyond that, I think West Fork of the Duchesne River as a whole has a fairly robust population of cutthroat trout, but they're restricted more to the headwaters of this creek. We've traditionally had some regulations in place that apply for cutthroat trout down the lower reaches of the West Fork of the Duchesne River, but those are stretches that just don't have cutthroat in them. So they've been sort of unnecessary regulations for putting limits on anglers on fish that they can't realistically catch just because they're not present. So we've been trying to progressively remove those kind of restrictions to, again, open up angler access and also reduce some of the clutter and confusion in our regulations. But the population as a whole, it is a very robust cutthroat trout population, but it's restricted more to the headwater portions of the creek.
Okay, yeah, I was just kind of wondering about the health of the stream, and then maybe just speak to the Strawberry River tributaries and potentially opening those up to access. I believe during kokanee spawn. Is that the way I understand that?
Yeah, during kokanee spawn. So right now, if you look at a good number of the tributaries, I went through them in the presentation, it was probably close to 20 tributaries to Strawberry Reservoir. We're proposing to allow fall access to anglers. Traditionally, we've had a fall closure on these tributaries to protect spawning kokanee salmon. But the reality is that a good number of the tributaries of Strawberry Reservoir, particularly the ones we identified in the regulation change that we're proposing, are too small for kokanee to spawn in. So we don't see kokanee run up into those creeks. As a result, our regulation that prevents access during the fall months for anglers is really unnecessary. It's protecting kokanee that don't exist in the river, and what it's doing is it's restricting angler access during those months. So our intention there is to really remove an unnecessary regulation that was again put in place to protect spawning kokanee, but it's just unnecessary because kokanee aren't up those creeks. Now we will still have under our proposal a kokanee closure in the fall in some of the larger tributaries to Strawberry Reservoir that do have spawning kokanee in it. So we're still protecting those. We're just opening it up to the creeks that don't have spawning kokanee.
Okay, so that's why Trout Creek would be still closed, is that does have spawning kokanee. Is that correct?
That's exactly why we pulled that one off. And then you'll note these are a little different under the regulation. I forgot all of them, but Strawberry River and Indian Creek, and there might be another one still have a fall closure as well because they've got robust spawning populations of kokanee.
Thank you.
I have another comment, and I hate to be a pest, but this is kind of one of the things that I always wondered about Utah as far as our stocking program. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's great for put and take fisheries, but does the division ever explored the idea of wild trout in certain areas and trying to keep those fish wild? If you look at Montana, they don't stock a lot of fish. They rely on wild population reproduction. I just think it'd be really cool to advertise to the public that this is a stream that is filled with wild trout. There's no stocking, blah, blah, blah. I just think, has that been explored by the division?
I would say, yes, it has been explored, but it hasn't been well advertised. And I'll kind of put some context to that. If you look across the state at the amount of stocking that we do into streams, we honestly do stock some streams, but we don't stock a very large number of streams, and the total number of fish stocked in streams is fairly low. If you look in contrast, the bulk of our fish are going to the lakes and reservoirs. And as you mentioned, they're primarily put and take opportunities where those lakes and reservoirs get high angling pressure. And we feel there's a need for us to add fish to provide an angling opportunity. In most rivers in the state, we don't really have that kind of situation going on where we don't have such extreme angling pressure that we feel that we need to regularly stock them. Most of our stream stocking happens in situations where we're maybe trying to bolster numbers in a creek. So that often maybe happens after a rotenone treatment where we're trying to reseed a population with fish. Or we sometimes do some stocking in and around high use areas like campgrounds during the summer months. Really kind of beyond that, most of our rivers in the state are truly wild rivers. And I think to kind of build on your comment, I think probably as a state, we could probably do a better job of advertising that, bringing forward, this is why we stock, why we don't stock, and highlighting the fact that really we've got probably several thousand miles of truly wild rivers in the state. We just don't maybe bring public attention to that as much as we could.
I agree. I really love to see the division push the idea that we do have wild reproducing populations of fish in the state of Utah. I mean, if you look at the Cup Slam program, that's been a huge success. And it's mainly because those are wild fish. Well, they are wild fish, and bringing them back to their native habitat and their native ranges. I mean, I think the division does really well with that program. And I think we could probably build onto that with just advertising that we do manage for wild trout. So that's my spin on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanner, would you like to speak?
Henry Carlson representing SFW. We just accept the division's recommendations, and we're thankful for everything that the division's doing for our fisheries in the state.
Thank you. So anyone else want to? Yes, we have public comments that came in online.
There's one online comment. They strongly agreed with the proposal, and it reads as follows. I am providing this input on behalf of the Utah Anglers Coalition, UAC. UAC is an affiliation of many different angler groups and fishing industry representatives in the state of Utah. As a group, we support the proposed changes to the 2023 Utah Fishing Guidebook as contained in the presentation by Randy Oppiger. We also support recommended changes to R657-13 and R657-4. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments before we move on to motion? Okay, I would entertain a motion regarding item 5, fishing recommendations and Rule 657-14.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion. If we go ahead and adapt the division's recommendation on have the wording there, but we proposed.
I would second that.
Those present in the meeting here, all in favor, raise your hands. 7. Joe? Oh, you got it. There we go. And Eric, okay, unanimous, thank you. We will now move on to the Henry Mountains Bison Management Plan. Guy Wallace is with us from, where do you live, Guy?
Monticello.
Monticello. Thank you for coming up, Steve.
Thank you. I'm the Southeast Region Wildlife Manager, and probably to try and summarize this a little bit, is the last plan was written in 2007, and there have been enough changes or habitat projects. We had some research studies, major research studies that were done, that we felt it was time to update and revise the plan. And so we went about forming a committee, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about the committee, because that was a big part of the process in getting this plan completed. We had a 16-person committee. We tried to get representatives from every entity or interest in the population, and there is quite a bit. It's a very unique bison herd, and it's recognized nationally as well as the state, and that it's so there was a lot of passion in the group, in each of the members, and discussions that we had. We met for about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, but the period of time was 2.5 years, because we were right in the middle of meetings when had the COVID outbreak. And so we made a decision to not have online meetings, and wait until the restrictions were lifted to where we could have face-to-face in-person meetings. So that took about 6 months out of that time. And then we met again and continued our meetings. Some of them were very passionate meetings. Like I said, the members were passionate. They were difficult. We had some very difficult discussions because there was some real concerns with some of the members on the committee, and we tried to work through each of those issues by identifying those issues and then spending the time to develop strategies in the plan that we could try and address some of those issues or whatever issues we could. And there was a lot of give and take in that committee. And I think if someone from the committee was here to speak on it, they'd tell you that it's not a perfect plan. That, I think probably nobody felt that they got everything they wanted through that process, but there was enough in it that we were able to develop a workable document that they could live with and that we could continue on with management of the Bison herd. And so I wanted to emphasize the importance of that process that we went through. So anyway, I'll take any questions you have.
Just maybe a summary of where you're at. I watched your presentation and it was quite clear and well done, by the way. Where you're at right now with these drought numbers on population and what your goal is with the 325 in the plan. Are you below that right now? Or are you increasing % or where are you at?
Yes, we are below the objective. The objective remained the same from the previous plan, which was 325 adults post-season. So that objective stayed the same through this plan. But we also wanted to try and maintain the flexibility that we could adjust the population as needed based on range conditions. And that was a very important aspect of this committee process. And so we developed some strategies that would try and help us guide us through that process. Currently, for the last year, we have been below that objective. We have managed to a population of 290 adults all season. This year, probably about a month ago, we were down there and we did both our surveys and our classification, and we were kind of right in the middle of a lot of this precipitation series of storms that we were getting. So some of the ranges looked really good. Portions of the ranges looked really good that had received rain, but then there was also portions that, these were localized storms, so they didn't hit everywhere. And so there were portions that we felt were important enough that looked pretty bad, that we felt that it was necessary to add some permits and reduce the herd down to 275 is what the permits are designed to do. So we'll be at 275. And we may have received some storm on some of those areas since then, but we kind of, wanted to make this adjustment. And then if those storms hit and the range conditions improve in those areas, then we'll come back next year and try and increase bison herd back up towards objective.
Thank you. Questions?
So I was wondering, in the presentation, you talked about bringing in some bison from other areas to increase the amount of genetic diversity in that herd, and and how's that? I was just wondering how that was happening and where you're getting the bison from.
There was a study done in 2020 by the Department of Interior where they looked at the 18 different bison herds that inhabit Department of Interior lands. And the primary focus of that study was to look at genetic makeup of those herds. And they tried to look at what, based on the level of cattle aggression into those herds, what the best possible matches were for transplants, donor herds, or transplant source herds. And so, that's all well and good, but it's not that easy to just go out and get some bison from somebody that matches genetically the population that the Henry Mountains has. And so we've been working, we've had feelers out with different states to try and see if we can come up with a possible transplant for that herd. And it's primarily is for genetic purposes. The Henry Mountains was identified as one that has fairly low genetic diversity. And that may be due to the population size. And so it's important that we try and bring in some new some blood to that herd and improve genetic diversity and maintain herd size to try and maintain that genetic viability of that herd. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so is there a plan in place right now to bring in individuals or?
In our heads, there's a plan.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to bring in animals and we've had some discussions with Montana, with Yellowstone, with some other places that have herds that we feel like would match genetically our herd.
Where did they originate, the Henry Mountain bison?
They were from Yellowstone, the 1940s, so they've been there 82 years.
And they don't genetically match the Ammo-Byron ones from the same place?
No, they're all. Did they do this? Excuse me. Wade Paskett's here is the wildlife biologist for the Henry Mountains. Was that animal filing part of that study? No, so they did not look at animal filing.
Any other questions? Questions from the public? Do we have any online comments? No online comments. Tanner Carlson.
Tanner Carlson, sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. President of SFW, Troy Justinson, was able to be on that bison committee. He said there was a lot of good give and take. Everybody was able to work together and come to an agreement on that. One thing that we've learned is that that bison herd is not only important to the state of Utah, but it's also important to the country. It's a very big icon that a lot of people like to see out here in the West. And so we support Division's management plan, and that's it. Thank you.
Any other final comments from the RAC before I ask for a motion?
I have one comment. I did visit with the rancher from that area today. He did serve on the committee. They are supporting the plan. Their main concern still probably remains the winter range. Some of the bison, he thought maybe a third to a half of the bison are already on the winter range. And so they was hoping that maybe some monsoon rain or whatever would kickstart that grass and get ahead of it. But the bison's kind of already beat the grass there. And so they support the plan. They're just, their main concern remains that winter range.
Yeah, that was a big issue, and we talked about some strategies to try and address some of those concerns. And bison can go where they want, so it's not like we can hurt them other areas. But there was some areas that were just starting to green up. There were some areas that were already green, and there were some areas that were not green at all. And so they're going to try and find the best forage that they can get, but they moved. So quickly, on a whim, they'll take off to go to the other or to the top of the mountain. And so I don't know recently where that, but we did have some that did move down, and that was probably in response to the green up and to take advantage of that.
Maybe focus some habitat projects in that.
Exactly. That was one of the strategies that we would prioritize our habitat projects on winter range where there were livestock conflicts. Thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion on the Henry Mountains Bison Management Plan, item 6.
I'll make the motion to support the plan as presented by the division.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Joe? Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 7, if we're ready. Everybody ready? Good to keep going? Okay. Chad Wilson is here. Chad, if you don't mind, somewhere in your summary, kind of go back and refresh our memories of the process of what was initially taken to the wildlife board and what the proposal was before we get into the changes.
Yeah, so we had a committee formed a year and a half ago. That committee met 9 times, brought a proposal to the wildlife board. That went through in the spring. And at the board meeting on June 2nd, they did pass our plan with the caveat that the landowners could unite and come back to that committee and make recommendations. So probably the main changes that were approved at that board meeting was a 1-to-1 access for public hunters. So every voucher that an LOA got, the public hunter would get, and it would be assigned through a draw. And it wasn't a mandatory access. Well, I guess if the public wanted to be on there, they had the opportunity. They weren't confined to stay on that private land. They could hunt anywhere. The other thing would be that we did a multiplier to determine what the tag numbers would be, and that was based on an acreage percentage. So in the old plan before that, there was a caveat that you could do it on acreage or usage to try to make it more objective. That's what came through that committee, was to do it based on the acreage. And then that was approved. So as I said, they gave a chance for the LOAs to come back to the committee. They came back with some proposals. But before, let me back up a little bit. So the motion that the board gave was that the LOAs could come back to our committee, and what they presented to us, if it was agreed upon by the division and the committee, that would go back through the RAC and the board process. And anything that was not agreed upon would not. With that being said, we met July 28th. The LOA came and presented really 6 items. 4 of those were supported, and 2 were not. So the items that were supported was to establish an LOA advisory committee. We clarified that an individual in the LOA could be held accountable before the whole LOA was. So if there was a bad actor there, that it wouldn't jeopardize the whole program necessarily. That program performance metrics would have input from the LOAs. And so what we're doing there is the LOA advisory committee, which will have LOA representatives on it. They will help determine what those performance metrics are. Now we just clarified some language of that LOAs and DWR will work cooperatively together. I mentioned in my presentation there was there was 2 items that were not supported by the committee, and they both had to do with the multiplier. Probably the main one to touch on is that they proposed a 1.5 permit multiplier for their plans that were enrolled in the LOA. And during that discussion, I think it was a long discussion. So we spent a lot of time on that. It wasn't supported in the end by the committee. There was some talk about potentially having some sort of a multiplier potentially in the future, probably more dealing with cropland in those instances. But ultimately 1.5 was not supported. And it's something that we as a division are committed to, like, as going forward, that we can still have those discussions. We get better data in, more data to analyze and look at. So, yeah. And I guess the other thing that I would say is one of the main focus points in discussions there was the ability for LOAs to hunt the whole entire unit. So with the ability to hunt the unit, that greatly increases the value of the permits that we're giving them. It's a public, those vouchers come straight out of the public draw. So they're very valuable. They're permits that take 10, 15, 20 plus years to draw. And we give those to LOAs every year. So they're very valuable permits, and we feel with the public land, it even adds that.
Next question. Yep, so to clarify one thing, there were two options initially. One was, as you said, where it's a 1-to-1 match and their hunters get, the LOA tags get to hunt the whole unit. And then a 1-to-1 match on the public numbers on the private land. There was an option 2 where that's in the rule, correct?
Yeah.
That if they choose to just hunt their property, then the match is not 1-to-1, it's 20%. If there was 10 tags, 2 of them would be public and 8 of them would be LOA tags, correct?
Right, yeah, so, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up. So that is a good point is, and in the rule, that is something going forward too, like a multiplier would, I think the discussion, if they choose option 2, that would be a lot easier to have a multiplier when they don't have the benefit of the whole unit and understand their private lands.
And so is everybody on the RAC clear what we're discussing tonight? The rule was passed by the Wildlife Board with a window of opportunity to modify it and bring it back through the RAC processes. The LOA, there's a couple LOA individuals here tonight that are going to speak. They presented these options to us. I was on the committee and we had a discussion of them. The multiplier effect was, I mean, the first 4 items, that's, great idea. The committee, just like the CWMU committee, we felt everyone was really on side. Then we get to the multiplier discussion and it kind of went, maybe it ought to just be on irrigated land. Maybe, there was the argument made by the LOAs that their land is more productive and deserve to want, a multiplier effect. And I'm sure there's some lands that fit that category. The discussion was how much, because the community has concerns that not all private acres in the state had that extra value, especially as you get into drier, areas as you move into the desert climates, the 1.5. And so I assume it's headed, I assume the advisory committee, that would be a task on their list. But when we left it, because we could not agree on a multiplier, we at least informally said that will be a great task for the advisory committee to analyze when it gets formed. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yep. And if my memory serves me correct, we did vote on that. And I think there's 10 committee members there, and 8 said they didn't support a 1.5, and 2 said that they did. So that's how it was.
There were just so many unknowns, at that meeting statewide. The implications were fairly large on public tags. When you start talking 1.5 multiplier, we didn't feel like as a committee that there was near enough information to make that decision and make a multiplier blanket statewide. So I think that is accurate. Questions from the RAC for Chad?
Chairman, I'd just like to clarify that I am a small landowner up there. Mr. Pelican to understand that does not, with our attorney's advice, it does not affect my voting, as long as I clarify that I am a small landowner.
And you will continue, you will vote. Okay.
But can I add one more thing? I'm glad you said something because it sparked something in my mind that just the clarification on my last presentation. I stated what Diamond Mountain's position was, the letter that they sent to me. I don't know if I was clear that when they asked for removal of animals, that they weren't asking them to be removed from the whole unit. It was just from Diamond Mountain lands. From the private lands. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Okay. Question.
I guess I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
The BLM is remaining neutral on this subject due to the private land issue and abstaining. So, and if we can clarify that, and that's based on our grazing regulations have a unique relationship with private landowners. This is a private landowner business situation with the Division of Wildlife at this time. So our manager just is appreciative of this sincere dialogue that went into all of this work this summer, but right now we'll be abstaining.
Okay. I have a few questions. So it's the opinion of the division that under the current rules, the rules that was just passed, that the vouchers that the landowners receive is adequate compensation for depredation and habitat. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What objective measurements does the division use or standards do they use to determine that that's adequate compensation for the depredation?
And so it is a little bit tricky because we don't get exactly what we don't get the numbers in that they're sold for, right? So they don't have to report to us what their tags get sold for, but you see some sold at auctions and whatnot. A lot of it is range land. So as far as monetary compensation from the division, we don't compensate. We can help the expenses and help with a lot of other issues. So, the majority of it, we wouldn't pay, like, I guess any additional money would be above and beyond what those that are not in that LOA would get. That makes sense.
Kind of. So we use objective measurements, and there's actually a formula we use to determine the carrying capacity of range. I'm sure Dusty can confirm that. BLM, the land managers use a formula, an actual formula based on pounds of forage eaten per animal, which you know how much deer now eat. That can be figures. So did the division use a formula to determine the approximate value of the depredation? I mean, we kind of know, the biologists kind of know the numbers of private land usage with elk and deer. So what formula did you use? Did you use a similar formula for land managers that we use to determine the value of that forage?
Like I said, on the stuff that's range land, then there isn't any monetary compensation on that. So
there's value. There might not be compensation, but that forage has a value.
Sure. Yeah. So
and some of this private land is range land.
Yeah.
And so that forage has a value. How did you determine the value of that forage? And so that you know that the compensation is more than that.
Well, that's a tough question.
Well, we do it every day. So I'm just wondering how you guys did it.
You gonna build me up with that?
Let me help you out with it. So I'm Dax Magus. I'm the big game program coordinator, and I guess maybe take a couple steps back. When in 1776, when we signed the Declaration of Independence, we left the old world. We came here to North America. We decided we're getting away from the idea that the lords and ladies that own the land own the wildlife, and it kind of started what we call, the North American model of wildlife management. There's case law going back to, I think, the early 1800s, like 1803, when the courts ruled that wildlife, fish, water, are a public resource, and they're managed for the public good. They're not necessarily owned by individuals. At the same time, we recognize private property rights, and we have direction in state code to find ways to alleviate damage that occurs on private lands that's caused by big game. And so this program exists not necessarily to create like a dollar for dollar match of how we meant, how many blades of grass did a pronghorn eat, and how much is that blade of grass worth, and who's going to get paid for it. There's an idea, and this is another thing that's been determined in the courts, that wildlife are a quote unquote act of God. They exist on the landscape. And so we don't manage wildlife exactly the same that someone might manage, a commercial domesticated animal that's put there, to try to raise beef or mutton or whatever it is. So I think this comparison and how did you determine this this program exactly compensates is probably not apples to apples. I think there's some fair questions and it's something we do look at. A few years back, we did an analysis in the Book Cliffs unit, for example. And we had our depredation personnel look at all the irrigated cultivated croplands in the Book Cliffs and calculate how much monetary compensation would we pay to these landowners for this damage if we did nothing, if we didn't, set up depredation hunts or give them cow tags or, herd animals out of fields. If we did absolutely nothing but count and pay in the Book Cliffs unit, what would it be? And so, and it was around $40,000 worth of wildlife use on private irrigated cultivated cropland. At that point in time, the Book Cliffs LOA, the market value of their LOA permits was in excess of $250,000. So in some of these circumstances, that's the case. In some of these circumstances, and we've heard from, local folks that they feel like the compensation is not adequate. Some places I think it probably is, maybe more than adequate. Some places maybe not. It's a good program and it helps us bridge the gap between this idea of the North American model and that wildlife belong to everyone and that they belong to all the citizens of the state. And we want to manage wildlife, but wildlife have a right to exist on the landscape. And it also helps us bridge that gap between private lands. And this whole program is a recognition of the value and contributions that private landowners provide to wildlife. Whether it's an adequate, amount of compensation or incentive or reward for that contribution, I think that's the discussion that we're involved in. And we had a committee that spent a lot of time working on that. If you compare what we do in Utah to other states, I think it's a pretty good program here, and the division feels pretty good about it. As far as exact dollar for dollar, does it match here? Does it match there? I don't know if we have a great answer for that type of analysis. So, sorry, I'm not trying to take over. I just wanted to throw that.
Get this kind of, we've had discussion for a year and a half. And what we're here tonight to discuss is the Wildlife Board passed a motion that said if you own 40% of the acreage and you are an LOA in this, and you want to participate in this voluntary program, you get 40% of the tax.
Yeah.
They've made the decision, acre. I know there's some discussion about multiplier, and we're going to have that here in a moment. But though this is very good discussion, we already had that discussion for many meetings and at all the RACs and at the Wildlife Board on the value and and whether we agree with the decision of the Wildlife Board or we disagree. Where we're at tonight is they made the decision, and we have the opportunity to look at proposals that came in, which was 6 items. 4 of them are supported by the division, 2 are not. And that's what we need to keep tonight's discussion pertaining to, because obviously there's still a lot of feelings that what the Wildlife Board did was not right by the private landowners. I hear it all the time, and I understand that. But our job tonight is to look at the six proposals that came in and decide what recommendation we send to the Wildlife Board as to whether they tweak what they approved. Fair enough? Is that accurate? Is that the way you see it?
Turn it back to you.
Yeah, I don't want to go back and discuss things we have no control over now.
And that's what I'd say too. And I mean, they were pretty specific of the things that were not agreed upon in that committee meeting that they weren't to come back through. UR RACs, you can make recommendations however you see fit, but that was the directive of the board.
Multiplier, which we're about to have, is an economic issue.
So my question was pertaining to
it is so.
So I'll proceed.
So we can, when it comes to the multiplier, whether we support a multiplier or what that multiplier is, I think that's fair game tonight, as a recommendation back to the Wildlife Board.
Yeah. So I'll be brief. So on your second alternative, where the vouchers would be private lands only, So I've talked to a lot of landowners, a lot of the LOAs, most of them in fact. There's certain LOAs and landowners that during the hunting season, they receive vouchers, but their lands are not impacted depredation wise during the hunt. Their land is affected later in the year, not during hunting season. So how would those private lands only have any value for the depredation they receive later if they don't have the animals there during hunting season? Their depredation occurs later on. So how would that incentivize them?
Yeah, so that's why there's two options, honestly. I mean, we had, back in the committee, we had discussions about, should it just be relegated to private lands? That was one of the options that we talked about. And one of the reasons that we didn't go down that road where there wasn't two options, that the only option was to be on private lands, was the recognition of exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, that's
So
why
each landowner could choose that different option.
Each landowner association,
So how is the recent rule changes and the proposed rule changes, how has that improved wildlife and wildlife habitat availability? How is it projected to improve that?
So the reason for those changes is probably about 10 years ago, boards started talking about it. They started talking about the rule being broken. And the two places that I touched on earlier that were changed in June, those were the two things where the complaints are coming back was public access and having it be random. And also that there was an objective way to allocate those tags. We had some LOAs that were based on usage and getting almost three times the amount of tags is what they would get based off of an acreage one, while others were stuck with the acreage.
Well, that's not my question. How does the changes improve wildlife and improve wildlife habitat? How does it improve? How did the changes improve those two things, wildlife and wildlife habitat?
Yeah, so for the most part, I mean,
they're designed to improve wildlife and wildlife habitat. These changes.
It's a voluntary program that we're trying to give incentives to landowner associations, right? So they have that ability to. These changes weren't like super drastic as far as our management style. I mean, it's not increasing or decreasing tags. If that's what I'm trying to understand what you're trying to get at here.
I'm just asking, how does it improve wildlife and wildlife habitat?
Yes.
These rule changes.
So there isn't.
I'm trying to figure out how it improves it, and I cannot figure out how it improves wildlife or wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
I think it was a consistency, a goal of some fairness and consistency program wide, which there wasn't before.
So
don't know that.
Where it's a voluntary program, if they voluntarily back out, how does it improve wildlife and wildlife habitat?
If they back out, if they stay in, what does it do? Like it's a program. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to answer that question.
We're a wildlife board, so I'm
right.
looking from the wildlife and the habitat.
Yeah, I think this is more based on allocation of permits and stuff. Is more what we're looking at.
Yeah, the whole impetus for the revision to this rule was not necessarily to find like ways to do more to improve wildlife habitat. This focus on this rule was to correct like inconsistencies and issues like that. The program is designed to provide incentives that would provide benefits to wildlife, but these changes that went through last year and then again last spring and then again now, these changes are more focused on like technical fixes and consistency within the program and not so much on, I don't know that, it's probably a fair question that how would changing the allocation of permits that might cause a reduction for some landowners help wildlife habitat? It probably won't. So, but that's not why the rule was revised.
Okay, so the rule changes may in fact harm wildlife.
It's possible. So, if a landowner withdraws their land and decides to subdivide it, it's possible it could have negative effect on my life.
Okay, thank you. You said the one access, so if the landowner received one tag, he has to let on the draw system, you guys would arrange 100 come in. Is it for the whole place, or is it for the hunt last 2 weeks, a full 2 weeks, or explain that part, please?
Yeah, so it'd be for all the lands that are enrolled in the LOA. And
so I draw the tag. I could go to any of the land that's in the LOA and hunt it.
if you're the one that had the assigned access, yeah.
I can see where that would be a, situation on Diamond is all the drawed elk hunters are going to be in one canyon. If, the ones that draw that special tag,
yeah.
I don't know how that group of landowners would accept how many, 30 or 40 elk hunters in one area. How did that doesn't look like that would work, or just comments.
Well, yeah. And I guess what I'd say to that is, throughout hunting, hunters are able to disperse themselves a lot. So if you had a monster bull in a canyon, that there might be a lot of people out of that one on public, including people with the LOA vouchers, right? So, it's something that we talked through, we worked through it, but felt like if we're going to give a voucher to an LOA that says you can hunt the whole entire unit, fairness would say that public should be able to have that opportunity to hunt.
Well, but in the fairness of landowners, particularly spots, they're going to all be pretty much in one area. And how's that fair to that one landowner to take care of all the other, landowners got the tags, but, it looks like to me that needs a little bit of consideration.
We were, not to interrupt you, but we were hoping that some crowd management options would be presented back to our committee, specifically by Diamond Mountain. Because we said, if this concern came up many times. We said, well, present some ideas. That's why we're taking, that's what we're doing right now. And, Diamond not only did not present any ideas, they sent some letters saying, we're no longer participating. And so I understand what you're saying, and it's very real issues on Diamond, but Diamond, they always have the option to change their mind, that they chose to go the other route and not provide any options of how about we alternate public, private. Anything was on the table as far as a suggestion, but none came in.
We had that discussion as a committee, and what we felt was most equitable was what we presented. And I would agree with Brett. I had landowners talk to me as well, and I said, if this is what we're trying to accomplish, if you guys have some ideas, bring them back. And we didn't have any brought back to us. So with this latest round of revisions, there was really nothing to consider with the directive that the board gave us as far as that goes. And I would say, I've said this on the multiplier and all the other racks, is going forward, no matter which way the board turns, we'll work with the landowner, we'll talk to the landowners, we'll try to see if there's avenues for a multiplier. We'll try to see if there's avenues that we can help with that as well. But at the same time, we are comfortable with the rule that we passed, or ready to move forward with it.
Yes, Daniel, go ahead.
Quick question on that. So with the establishment of an LOA committee, similar to that of the CWMU committee, advisory committee, and the newness of the plan, kind of looking forward a little bit, but is there opportunities that, some of these things could be brought back around? Because typically plans 5, 7, 10, 15 years, right, for renewals.
Every 5.
Yeah, so it's been a long time since it was. So is there openness that those kind of things can still come around?
Yeah.
With the newness of the council?
And that's, I guess what I'd say on that is I think that was one of the best things that came out of this plan was there's a president training. And, you know, they brought back, the LOA advisory committee. And I think that those tools will help communications. I don't think communication between the division and LOAs was super good beforehand. Maybe it's still not super good, but it's getting a lot better. And that's the way I see it going is that it will continue to get better. Operator training in the CWU program has helped that program out a ton. And so just by doing that president's training, it's a chance to talk, to get feedback. LOAs are now trying to form an LOA association, like a CWU has an association that help immensely in our talks and are trying to work things out moving forward, and the division's open to those ideas.
I forgot one question. So the division would not support the LOAs that receive these vouchers if they receive a multiplier. One of their proposals was do something charity or have some sort to help fund the LOA association. The DWR would not support those vouchers being used to fund that association. Is that correct?
So on that, there's a couple of issues there. One is, I don't know that you could tell somebody that they have to participate in charity. So if there was an LOA out there, it's like, I'm not going to give up any of my tags. I don't know that we could force them that. And I don't think we can force them into an LOA association either. So with those two things, it would be very problematic to put that in rules saying that this is what is required of you. With that being said, if LOAs wanted to give a tag to a charitable organization, any of those vouchers they have, they could do that.
What about that public resource being used to help fund that association with the DWR not support that?
So I think we'd handle that the same as what the CWU association does. And as far as I know, they're not funded through the permits.
Okay. So for administrative, the division won't support using that public resource to support the administration costs of the association.
Yeah.
If I may, they currently do. So the Landowners Association has the bylaws, that in the bylaws for all the participating landowners to participate, they can establish so many permits be sold for administrative uses by the Landowners Association. That does take place. And whether they support it or not, that's up to the LOA.
That's a good point, Daniel. We allow a lot of flexibility to LOAs. They can, whatever they sell their tax for, they can determine what that is. And even back to the access issue as well, is if there's a guy that has all the hunting on him, then maybe the LOA they could write rules saying, you know, depending on how much pressure they get more of the piece of the pie from the tags that are sold. So there's a lot of leeway for them to work out a lot of these problems on their own. And I think it's a good thing because a lot of LOAs are a lot different from each other. So for them to know their private lands and where the pressures are, where the hunting is, where the animals are, who's getting hit the hardest, and to be able to allocate those internally amongst themselves, I think is a good thing.
On the charitable issue, which we discussed at length also, the proposal. The concern of the committee was if you give a multiplier effect and you say a percentage of them have to go to charity, all you've really done is gave public permits to the charity. Because that's where them permits come from. If you do a multiplier effect. So that's what, even though that's a great cause and a great idea, that was the concern. You know, if you increase the tags, but say a percentage of them have to go to charity, you've just taken all the charitable tags out of the public portion, not out of the private portion. And if, like we said, if the LOA is within their allocation, wanted to give some to charity, that's very normal and great.
Question for you as well. So was, and maybe the committee kind of their consensus, was the hang up on the hard number of 1.5 times, or was the hang up on a multiplier?
At first it was on a multiplier. We feel like the public land being able to be hunted is the multiplier, like the value. If they're stuck on their private LOA lands, that tag is way less valuable than being able to hunt the whole entire unit. It was brought up as discussion went on. It was more of a hesitation of 1.5's not the right multiplier. I think that was not 100% consensus, but vast majority thought that's not the right multiplier. Is there a place that a multiplier could potentially be used? It was left open. Yeah, that's a potential as we get more data in and we look at that a little bit closer and more discussions that potentially that could happen in the future.
So is that where the consensus came from then? Is it somebody that had crop land, commercial value, cultivated crops, didn't feel like they were getting their fair share essentially? So with the LOA having the ability to diversify those permits to, upon themselves equitably repay the usage and the impact on certain lands, especially those with commercial crop. Is that where that came from? Some of the landowners didn't feel like they were being.
Well, that actually didn't come from the landowners. That came from a member of our committee that brought up a lot of, we looked at doing it on a multiplier on cropland. So it wasn't something that the landowners brought forward. It was an idea thrown out there by a committee member. Other committee members took pause and thought about it for a while. And, it was a lot of meetings. That one already was running pretty late. And it was pretty apparent that there was no way to get to a certain number on that or have the proper discussion.
Any questions? I know we're going to have some comments from
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just I'm trying to understand the clarification here. So if somebody withdraws from the LOA and so they're no longer able to get vouchers, are they then not able to get depredation as well? Or are they, because they don't take an LOA voucher? And then how does that also, if the whole Diamond Mountain withdrew from this, from a biological standpoint, maybe we got a two-part question. If Diamond Mountain, the entire LOA said, we don't want to participate, what does that do to the deer and elk herds there? Because they're plentiful, I believe. But then what happens to depredation, or how do they hunt those animals without, is it specifically then on a draw if there's no tags given? I guess I'm just kind of a little bit confused on the way that this is trying to go.
Yeah, so it's a unit-wide program. So they get a portion of the permits that are given out. If they withdrew from the LOA, then all those permits would go to the public and none would go to the private land. That private land, the LOA lands that are enrolled are still part of that unit. So you have the potentials that those landowners, especially those that hold animals during the hunt, would have the chance that they could participate in the depredation program. They can also sell trespass rights. So that'd be a way for them to make a little bit of money. But the LOA program it's a voluntary program in our depredation program. So if right now statewide there's a lot of limited entry units that don't have LOAs on them, and we would handle Diamond Mountain or any others, or even if it's just some of the landowners, we'd handle them the same that we handle landowners in any other limited entry unit that doesn't have an LOA, and that's by following our depredation rule depredation code and doing the things that were directed in there. Does that fully answer it?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Diamond Mountain didn't participate, the LOA didn't participate, and you give out a certain amount of tags, wouldn't that just drive the animals onto those LOAs and therefore you would have more depredation issues? Because you can't just go access that because it is private property. They don't have to let you access that, even though you open it up or give more tags. I guess I'm just trying to understand, exactly how this applies if the LOAs accept this or don't accept this. Back, I think this is the same discussion that happened in May, I believe, and a lot of people were talking about withdrawing completely, so they wouldn't take the vouchers, so they didn't have to allow access. Is that correct?
And yeah, and we can adjust management plans out there as well. Really, we'd have to see what landowners. So by code, we have to respond, right? If a landowner says, "Hey, I've got issues with animals on here," they're supposed to immediately notify us with any damage, and we respond. We come up with a mitigation plan on how to handle that damage. And there's a variety of tools that we can use. I can see what you're saying. Like if none of those are going to private landowners and the private landowners don't allow any access, would it push them onto private lands? Yeah, there's that potential. I think we've shown in the past on a lot of these other units too, though, that we have mitigation cow tags. The elk are a lot of times the problem. That's one of the tools that we could use to help them get off of the private land. But it would mostly just be working with those private landowners and on each scenario, each individual basis, just determining the best thing to do to help them alleviate the damage.
So in other areas where you do have limited entry hunting and there is not a landowners association, do a lot of those landowners sell trespass rights? Is that a common thing?
I do not know that answer for sure, but I think if they had elk, they'd have the ability to, depending on how much they have. And a lot of the reasons a lot of them that aren't LOAs is because they can't hit the 50% rule. But I have a lot of them reaching out to me wanting to be part of an LOA. So.
It kind of, Mr. Chairman. It kind of looks like to me that boy, there's not one shoe that fits all. With this, as I look at it, the particular area on Diamond, up there, they get 3 tags every year, which takes in the majority of the best elk hunting. How many people would they potentially have to let in?
So
they accepted that.
Yeah, let me, you asked the question earlier and I don't think I fully answered it. So one of the other methods that we have in this plan to help, I don't think it is a perfect solution, but it would help, is that you can break out your tags by hunt. So you can put some in the archery hunt, some in the rifle hunt.
Who has
some in
the right to do that?
The
landowner.
Yeah, so the LOAs, but like I don't know that the division is not going to be supportive of saying, and I think it's in rule, like you can't just throw them all into archery hunt or the muzzleloader hunt. Like if you wanted to allow them all in one hunt, it'd have to be that rifle hunt.
Well, it looked like to me that there needs to be some kind of adjustments or variation. It's, how many tags could possibly go on Diamond and elk if there was, if they give out 100 tags, 30 of them landowners, how many of the others? Not just throwing numbers out.
Right. Yeah. I think they have 32 elk tags, if I remember right. So it'd be potentially 32 elk hunters if it's all the same season.
And they could all end up in 3 landowners.
Yeah.
It looks like to me there needs to be, I could see a 1 for 1, but I don't know how a person would can mitigate something like that or not. I'm sorry, I haven't been involved, so I apologize for it.
That's kind of what you're running into. That was the intent of the wildlife board, is to get these suggestions. There were 40, maybe 50 Diamond Mountain landowners at the wildlife board meeting. And the wildlife board said, we're going to approve this. And if you've got 2 months to come up with some ideas. Crowd management was definitely one of them ideas. I understand that it was basically indicated to me by the letters that I received is any access of public hunters is unacceptable on this LOA, and we're going to not participate. And so your idea is, this is good discussion, but
Past the discussion point.
Past that point. I mean, the wildlife board already said this is what we're going to do. And if you have some suggestions before the next round, which is the 6 that we got from the other LOAs, maybe just primary. Well, you guys kind of did an association,
We've
right?
included everybody,
Okay.
including Diamond Mountain.
So these 6, are all the LOAs. But that's one thing this process did is the LOAs didn't have a real good way to communicate either amongst themselves. I mean, they didn't have a very tight organization, and now they do. I don't know how tight, but I mean, now they have a network because they weren't. Some of the LOAs were caught completely off guard of this whole thing because there wasn't an association or, whatever you want to call it. And so that's kind of been going on the LOA side. Now they know each other, and they talk. But though your points are, and I'm not trying to cut you off.
Oh, I apologize.
Tonight we're looking at the 6. We could, I'll throw out some things. We could make a decision on the 6 items and then make any type of recommendation to the wildlife board we want. Like they assign the advisory committee to please look at these 3 issues. We could make recommendations to the wildlife board, however we choose as a RAC. But tonight's task is still, the division has said we support these 4 items. We do not support these 2. And we need to decide as a RAC whether we leave it like that, whether we agree with the division, or whether we say we want all 6 of them, whatever, on the RAC. So let's kind of head that way. And then if we want to, aside from the rule amendments, if we want to recommend some things to the wildlife board, we will. I will definitely, myself or Daniel or whoever's ever at the wildlife board, we will definitely take that to the wildlife board and make some suggestions to them. But we can't change what's in front of us tonight. We can support it or not support it. And that's kind of where we're at.
Then I guess what I'm trying to do is gather information.
Yes.
To know I can't support or not support something unless I ask for information.
And this is good discussion.
And I do have to have the information there that make a recommendation.
I'm not trying to cut you off, but these good ideas you have about crowd management and that.
So it's not ideas, it's just thoughts of what the process.
That was what this point everybody was trying to get to, that never made it through the process because of all there was a lot of conflict.
Mr. Chairman, I do need to make one correction. You said that the LOAs did not, that they're having an issue with the public. The LOAs that I've talked to, which is most of them, don't have an issue with the public access. They have an issue with the state mandated who those hunters will be. Portion of that. So just correction there. The majority of the LOAs are not opposing public access. They're opposing the mandate.
I was referring to Diamond Mountain's letter. Yes.
Diamond Mountain's letter doesn't say that. I got a copy. If you want to read it.
So if I'm mistaken, then I thank you for correcting me. Diamond Mountain is not opposed to public access, just
the mandate of
just the DWR telling them who the public is.
Correct, Dave? Correct.
All right, we can clarify that. So correctly.
I have a question. If I
Yes.
may, are we in the question period or?
I think, let me see if we've got any more questions from the RAC. Okay, question from the public.
Well,
Do you,
may I,
please state your name.
may
Bob.
I answer Daniel's question about allocation in the LOA?
Yes, would you please state your name first, so it goes through that record.
That, I was, I didn't need to come up and stand now.
My name is Bob Ott, and I'm with Ponce-Go Landowners Association, and I've been working with Dale on the statewide limited entry landowners association. But to your question, Daniel, in the Ponce-Go Landowners Association, we have in our bylaws that 20 acres of irrigated and mechanically harvested alfalfa is the equivalent of 640 rangeland acres. So when the distribution of the proceeds come in, they get allocated on the basis of units. And so, yeah, there is a way that the landowner association can deal with those issues within itself. The issue that we're talking about is not within the association, it's the allocation of permits with respect to the habitat value of the land. And we'll talk about that when we.
Why don't you roll into your comment, your 3-minute comment there?
Okay,
Where's that?
thank you.
We'll try, there's only a few of us that will try for 3 minutes, and if it takes 3.5 or 4, that's fine, but not the 25.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for allowing us to present some of the issues that we see with these rules. And we did, as you described, we did meet with the committee. We couldn't hammer out this one-to-one issue on the allocation of permits. We don't have a complete answer. I was hoping that we'd get together with the committee again and spend some more time on it. That hasn't happened. And so here we are at the 11th hour, ready to go back to the board. And our concern is that, for example, in the Ponce-Go unit, we have 61% of our landowners that have cultivated alfalfa acres in their land. And we all know from time and experience that it's like a magnet to the deer, the elk, pronghorn, and yet we account for it in our LOA, but this rule doesn't account for the allocation of the permits based on the habitat value. And so we're just claiming that it doesn't appear to be equitable to just take acres for acres, and it's just that simple. And we would like to see some kind of value placed on those lands that have higher habitat value, we think, for wildlife. Just another issue to think about where we're headed for the future of wildlife. Agriculture, maybe you have noticed in the state of Utah, everywhere, is dying away. You have new ski resorts, you have new housing developments, you have new businesses, you have new highways. You have water rights being sold to communities, and then the fields being fouled and eventually dying away to just land, bare land. So where do we want to go with this? We as landowners believe that there should be something of value for us to help maintain the value of habitat for wildlife in concert with the sportsmen, with the public, with everyone involved. It's important to us. And so I'm not saying that we need complete subsidy. We're just looking for a way to make sure that what happens under these new rules is an equitable thing. And local
manager at the Southern RAC meeting said, you know, your main issue is that you don't have 51% of the private land. Well, I would maintain that we have over 51% of the deer habitat that's valuable habitat that has degradation on it. But you know what the main issue is? The main issue is if we don't get this rule thing resolved, we probably won't have 51%. And then that means it goes away. And then that means we have all these landowners deciding they want depredation payments or whatever else. It's going to deteriorate and they're going to have a lot less tolerance for wildlife. So that's my concern. Thank you.
And to one clarification.
Sure.
Are you proposing 1.5 multiplier on irrigated land? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, I would propose at least 1.5 on irrigated land. The issue is, and we're not going to debate the color data and all that stuff at this point in time because we haven't vetted any of those numbers with the division or anything like that. But the reality is the wildlife comes and grazes on your croplands, and then they go out to the cover or whatever on the adjacent public lands. They can spend more time on the public land, but actually do more damage on or more use on the private lands. That's
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because that was a lot of discussion in the committee about irrigated, which is pretty indisputable. I think that you're going to get more value out of an irrigated acre than a range acre. I mean, I don't think they're going to get a lot of arguments. So I just wanted to make sure I heard what I thought you said. I didn't want to word here. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Dale Christiansen from Don't Open Deep, Mile Up Mountain.
I'm a little further north earlier. Thank you. Thank you all for, taking the time to listen to us, and we appreciate the opportunity. A couple of things. One of the things I just right off the top wanted to talk about is everybody keeps talking, well, there's option B. Part of why that doesn't work is you have to look at the LOA rule that was put together to address non-contiguous landowners. And specifically, the very reason that we can't be a CWMU is why we're an LOA, non-contiguous. And so the reality of, it working, they're not on your property, maybe one time, or they are on the other. Part of what we're here is, and trying to represent all the LOAs is to, this is the program that the state has to try to work with landowners like CWMUs, others. And it really is the program, and we want it to work. And that's why we're here at the table. And so I wanted to maybe give you guys some facts, a little bit about the LOAs. There's 644,000 acres of land enrolled in LOAs. That's private land access that's opened up. Over, 644,000 acres. Those range in size from 2,000 acres of private land to over 87,000 the tiny mountain acres. There's 21 LOAs that are split among 17 operators. Every region in the state has one, at least one. You guys have 3 in your region. That is broken down to 743 landowners. So I hope you can appreciate the difficulty of wrangling 743, let alone 21 landowners. And that's where, again, the key to all of this is for the state and us is this program was to provide an incentive for private landowners to manage their lands with quality habitat. That scale, based on the changes, got tipped to where the landowners are not feeling that incentive to manage for that wildlife. And so, again, what we're talking about is just wanting to be at the table, wanting to work cooperatively, but to make sure that the landowner feels and wants to do it. And that's, again, where we look to you guys to help us. Part of one of the other objectives in the rule is use objective criteria to determine how hunting opportunities are allocated. We took that to heart. We went back and said, all right, the state and the division wants to have an objective criteria of how they allocate used acreage. Great. They wanted to get away from the subjectivity of each, usage. That's why we went to objective criteria. We went to biologists, got the study, the data that supports the densities, that supported 2 to 3 times densities on our private land. We didn't ask for 2 to 3 times. If we're asking for just on our cropland, yeah, it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 times. But if it's, again, an LOA program where you're talking about the whole unit, we believe that a 1.5 times is an equitable compromise to be able to move forward with all the landowners. Again, to be able to make them feel good about providing that habitat. A couple of other things I wanted to just leave you with is, I know you've heard that that the state believes we're getting an equitable amount by the shares, but they've not proved that objectively. And even subjectively, all of the owners don't feel like it. We've tried to look again at the objective data. When we compared, the LOAs received 75% less private tags per enrolled acre of land than the CWMUs. Now, are we that much worse? Are those tags that we're getting that much better? I don't think so. We know they're not. So why? Why is it 75% less per enrolled acre? The LOAs with the 1-to-1 access rule, which we are agreeing with and saying, we're going to live with that and move ahead, we provide 50% more public access per enrolled acre than the CWMUs. So the LOAs are doing their part. We're trying. We're here at the table. We just need some help from the state and you guys to help us tip that back, that the landowners feel that incentive and want to be part of the program. The 1.5 multiplier is a key factor. The other 4, we support the 4 changes that are made. But we also request that you guys move the 4 and then also recommend that the 1.5 multiplier be adopted as well. And we appreciate your support and, again, want to work cooperatively with the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanner Carlson.
Tanner Carlson representing SFW. First off, we'd like to thank Chad for all of his hard work on this. A lot going on there for sure. We support the division's recommendations along with the committee's 4 recommendations that they came up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Shivers.
You want me over there, Brad, or does it pick up?
We can hear you fine. If you want to stay there, that's fine.
I'm Dave Shivers with the Diamond Mountain Landowners Association. I just wanted to go on record as saying that we're not against public access. We're against division mandated public access. There's no way that I can get public hunters access to 157 different landowners, private property on the mountain. And so it's just a program that doesn't work for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any no online comments that changes? Well, that's a lot of issues. I'm not ready for. I'm not going to call for a motion, Daniel, just so you know. What's the RAC thinking? Start it off, Daniel.
Well, I had a question for the LOA and OA Association state. I'm assuming the statewide association.
We're in process of formation.
So familiar with what happens locally and with some of the 3 LOAs you mentioned here, versus yours. You stated that you guys break it down in percentage and pay out on what's earned. So does a landowner in your program have the opportunity to say, no, I want the voucher allocated to my property to use? Or is it purely broken down monetarily and divided as such? Because you can stand right there if you want.
Okay. Bob again with the Poncegan Landowners Association. It's broken down monetarily. We don't allow any of the landowners to have vouchers. They're auctioned and they receive a pro rata share every year. They can bid on them if they want and buy them, but they don't get a voucher.
So Mr. Chair, to that question, that kind of goes back to what Chad brought up. From one association to another with the 1.5 times. If an LOA's bylaws, they're at liberty to quantify permit numbers to a specific landowner, however they see fit. But yet we offer 1.5 times. I can see now where the committee had the issues with trying to settle something, because that would be beyond difficult, because even though they have irrigated cropland, there's nothing in statute, code, rule, unless there did become something that no matter what the bylaws state, they would have to be granted that. Is that accurate? Because now I'm wrapping my head around the complexity.
I think you're seeing the struggle, whether 1 is a good number, whether 1.5 is a good number. You know, there was a lot of debate of what is a good number.
Where you have one LOA that does it shares acre for acre percentage breakdown versus other LOAs that get the permits granted, right? So then they can keep, sell, see what they
And then there's several LOAs. Well, I don't know if they're a hybrid, but I know in our area, some of them are sold. In our 3 LOAs, some of them are sold, you know, and some of them are retained.
Right.
And I have no idea what the percentages are. I've spoken with 3 Corners quite a bit with Mark up there, you know, and they have a rotation of, depending on your, I don't know if it's based on production or acreage, but every 3rd year, this person gets a tag, and, you know, some of them sell the tags, some of them keep them. And so I assume, Chad, you don't even know, because they don't tell you, but it's probably all over the board what they do with the tags, right?
Yeah, and it is in all of the bylaws, but I haven't memorized all of those. But yeah, I think a majority probably actually do sell them like the Poncegan to divide out money, but I know it's not all. And like you're saying, Bison, there's quite a few that will keep some and then give others out.
So is there any requirement to disclose the amount of money they make on the tags? Why not? If wildlife's a public resource.
Right, yeah. And I think it's just out of respect for private landowners and not forcing them to disclose that. But I mean, like I said, at auctions, you see some auctions, and so you get an idea of what some are getting. But yeah, we don't require that report out.
Sure. Partly to answer your question, David, again, we were trying to look at a modification to the rule that fit the objective, you know, that would go up and down with tags. And so there wouldn't be this, you know, where some were getting more than others based on that. But it also has to do with incentivizing every landowner, the 740 plus landowners that are in LOAs, of we're required to have more than 50% in each LOA. So in order to incentivize them and keep them, no matter what their land is, they have to feel like that it's worth being in it. And then again, that's where in jeopardy and the long-term health of the wildlife, you know, we may be talking about 20 tags this year, whatever, between the 1.5 or not. The issue is the long-term health of wildlife habitat. And if people and LOAs start disappearing, that land ends up going out of the habitat. And where does that lead? And so part of that is, again, for the LOAs and this program to be successful is to be able to, keep and incentivize and bring in other landowners that want to, build wildlife habitat.
And that's one point that just came up that I don't think we really discussed. So the number of tags varies unit-wide based on their annual recommendations. So therefore, the LOA tags vary based on their percentage. And then, back to your question of difficult number to come up with, we really didn't come very close to a multiplier number in the committee. One old guy with not much hair said maybe we ought to just do 1.5 times on irrigated acres and move that forward, and then let the process take place. But that was not supported. That was me, by the way. So we just could not come to an agreement. So the discussion was, we don't have a better number than 1 right now. That would be a really good task for the new advisory committee to really spend some time and make an educated decision. But I understand in the meantime, that's no guarantee that that's not years from now. It has immediate implications when you do that. And so we understand that.
So this just kind of adds the complexity a little bit more. If it was a single application similar to the CWNU, it'd be easy to manage statewide, right? If each landowner was compensated for their enrollment to the LOA that benefited wildlife, I think you would have a lot more landowners be more open to that. But with the ability where some owners only receive compensation through a rotated issuing of a permit that they can sell or utilize on a 10-year, 5-year basis, rather than annually like your association, that's where I think a lot of the landowners, and where my feedback I've gotten from landowners lies, because some of them don't want to receive the public access without receiving the monetary benefit or the opportunity that comes with the permit if they chose to keep. And that's where the pushback I see comes from. Whereas, if it was managed more like that, where they received shares based on acreage, it'd be more of an enticement. So without being able to mandate each LOA or one LOA rule that every association had to follow, it's tough.
Just a few comments. We're in the comment phase, right?
Yes, comment.
So 25, 30 years ago when the LOA program started, there were some issues that the program was designed to address. One of it was depredation issues. The other was to incentivize landowners to be habitat friendly, wildlife friendly. Program largely did that. It's been quite successful. Diamond Mountain is an example of that. The deer and elk herd compared to 30 years ago is not only increased in quantity, it has increased in quality. It's a limited entry unit. It's a good unit. And so we're kind of back to where we were 25, 30 years ago. We're right back there right now. Now we're having the same issues. So I see where we're running into an issue. What do we do? Do we open Diamond back up to general season to get the numbers down, to get rid of the depredation issue? All of the points that people are putting in for that hunt, they stay with the person. So those points go to another limited entry unit, and point creep is already an issue. So is that what we do? The division keeps saying this program is voluntary. I agree, it's voluntary. And so should the wildlife on private land be voluntary. That resource, that habitat on private land is not a public resource. Okay, so if these folks back out, they backed out. You'll have to go back to the issues we had 25, 30 years ago and figure out how you handle them then and go back to handle them that way. I've got to address so whether these landowners sell that voucher for $1 or $10,000, I'm like wildlife. For what I do for a living, I need open space and I need habitat. I need it. So if a landowner sells a depredation of one of these vouchers for more maybe than the division thinks that habitat was worth, it incentivizes them to not bust that up into 10-acre ranches. I don't want it. It's not going to help. Like I say, I'm like wildlife. I need open space. I need habitat. So it incentivizes them to keep that land open to wildlife. Okay. The more money they make on these vouchers, the more they're going to keep that land open, I guarantee. So why, I don't understand how we went from a program we entered into with the landowners. It was a good program. It's worked quite effectively. And now the landowners are the villains. They're the greedy nobility. How in the heck did we get there? I asked the question, how is these real changes going to improve wildlife and habitat? And the answer come out back said it. Probably not going to. It could actually have the opposite effect. Probably going to. Why in the world are we doing that? What in the hell? Honestly. I mean, I'm sorry for the language. You know, this nobility, this North American model, I agree with it. We don't want wildlife to belong to the nobility, only the wealthy, whatever. But the division has programs. That's actually what that incentivizes. They have other programs. We're starting to meet and look at those programs that need to be addressed. That's exactly what that is. Those other programs incentivize. There's an underlying issue here that people like me, we're not going to get over it because we believe in it. And that's some of the foundation principles of this country of private property. Okay, and some of the Diamond Mountain folks are that way. They will allow public hunters of their choosing, but they're not going to be mandated by the government who those are going to be. And so they're going to pull out, and I support them 100%. Okay, that's just the way it is. We're not going to get over it. We're not going to give up those foundation principles. You all can if you want. I'm not. I've had loved ones die for those principles. We buried your cousin's body. Okay. I'm not going to get over it. So I support them 100%. If that's the only principle that they pull out of this agreement on is that principle alone, I'm 100%
Thank you. I guess we could always make a recommendation to the wildlife board that they revisit pieces, but that's already been passed. Yeah, the public access. As far as tonight's, action item on the agenda, that's not a problem.
Maybe it helps me for us to drive person. Did I miss the boat somewhere? How am I supposed to learn about this stuff to come here and make a decision? Without asking questions and going back and see them. Did we as a RAC member did we miss the boat somewhere there to come here and be able to have the ability to dig into these questions?
We did have we did have the one RAC meeting where this was the topic and it was voted on, and we did not recommend as a RAC to proceed with this. You were not present at that meeting, and I should have sent you the minutes and called you or something, but your points are very valid. But it was discussed, and there was actually 70, maybe 75.
Did you go back and watch the meeting at all?
I had read the minutes, and I just, and I apologize for not being.
So
There's so much discussed in that meetings.
Right.
That these guys were talking about that there was not in our minutes. That was not where these, but anyway, that doesn't matter. I would like to, I'd surely hate to see, Richie stated it best. We go back to, there's so much here that's, the habitat is zero compared to the water. I mean, it really truly is. If you want to, the depredation that is on the mountain, who has developed the water on Diamond Mountain? Landowners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where's all the animals on the water? Where's all the water been developed on private land? And, we haven't talked about the fences, the problems that you have there with it. I just, you go back to what it was 23 years ago, and by 12, 22 years, something like that. That wildlife has benefited tenfold, and so has the public hunters from what it was. Tenfold, and it wasn't broken. I'm not sure why the division has approached, we want you don't fit all. You're not going to get everybody to give you access. If you're not going to give a guy one elk tag and say you're going to let 35 or 70 hunters go up there, that's not even an optional to think about. That's not even a consideration of anything. So why that is even proposed to come about, in my opinion, it needs to be equitable. And my motion would be that we do not accept these, and that they go back to the drawing boards and come back with a plan that will work for Book Cliffs, will work for the Ponscon, a variation of something that will work with every area is not the same. We go back to the way we were, and Mr. Shivers, I support you 100%. I'd go back to an open unit in a heartbeat. Let's just see what the public gets out of that. And the wildlife is going to suffer. They're going to take the brunt of this. I don't know why we are even here at this point on Diamond Mountain trying to fix something that isn't broke. That has worked very well from the landowners fighting with the division saying, close your cow elk hunt after November 1st. 20 years ago, they wanted to kill every cow elk that was on their property. Now it's saying won't let cow elk hunters on our property after November 1st. Give the elk a break to what it was 22 years ago, wanting every one of them dead. I don't know that there's ever been a complaint made of the elk herd on Diamond Mountain for being over objective. Has there? Deer herds is, a different deal, but the habitat is one thing, but the water is the thousands of dollars that landowners are spending right now to haul water to livestock is the cost on Diamond Mountain. I'm not well versed as Mr. Shivers is, but I cannot believe that we went this far with something that wasn't broke and that was actually fixed, amended. To my knowledge, everything's working fine. We had the recommendations in the earlier. You had to take a public hunter if you had a deer tag or an elk tags. That, to my knowledge, we used to create a list. I thought we read where we created a list and give to who the hunters were allowed on there. I just am very disappointed that we've ended up at this point on Diamond Mountain from what it was to what it's going to go to. I'd like to make the motion that we send it back and it is not fixed.
All right, hold on just a second. Does anybody have any more discussion before Brad makes a motion? Joe, go ahead.
Yes. Hey, I just want to, kind of chime in a little bit because I think, just some of the discussion we've had in the past. I have hunted other LOAs that actually do make sense. And when you receive a tag, then you accept some responsibility for that. I believe as landowners, when when something is given, something is gained. And so I think maybe I understand what is being said about something not being broke, but I also believe originally the LOA maybe stated that there was supposed to be some access given. I don't know all the rules and amendments of an LOA. I don't raise cattle. I don't know what it takes. I can tell you that what I used to pay for a landowner tag is about 3 times what it used to be. So I think there is compensation. And when you talk about the farmers, the ranchers building those water troughs, they do, but it's also with the help of, I believe, the tags that were sold because they also benefit. I mean, this is also not just about wildlife. This is a truly economic thing as well. And we have to recognize that. And, I'm not trying to get in anybody's pocket here on taking anything away, because I agree with Richie and on the fundamental rights of private landowners. But there is something when you accept a tag, when you accept a landowner voucher, I believe you're granting access. And maybe I'm wrong on what the LOA says there, but you don't have to accept that and allow private property. And I can tell you, Brad, Richie, if I owned your land, Mr. Shivers, I don't know if I would either. I like to hunt. So, I don't know that you have to allow access, but maybe that's where this needs to go. In the middle is just trying to, get to some kind of middle ground. And it seems like that's what the committee has tried, but we're still hung up because this is purely, in my opinion, it is a fair amount economic, because a lot of all over the Vernon Mountain, there is water run everywhere. And the landowners do that. That land association, I don't know exactly how many landowners. It's not as many as Diamond. Diamond's got a lot of landowners, so I understand the struggles there. But they allow people to hunt that whole thing, and hunters are spread out all over that place. And I think that it works. I'm not sure that Diamond can work that way, and I agree that the amount of land, the habitat grows all those great animals up there. I still think we're at a little bit of an impasse, and I honestly can't tell you what we're voting on tonight on what it looks like and what it doesn't. I'm not any better off after 2 hours of this than I was when we started, based upon what's being recommended. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Joe. So before Brad makes a motion, I want to clarify. So you've got some representatives from LOAs that stood up and said they support this with addition of a multiplier. They're recommending we go for a multiplier. What's on the table, the division has said we have 4 items we support. This is a rule that's already been passed by the Wildlife Board, and this is a modification or a tweaking of it that we're talking about tonight. The division says they have 4 items they support that came in as recommendations from the LOA, 2 that they do not. The LOAs are represented tonight. They said they agree with the 4. They want to add one of the other 2, the multiplier. I'm fine with you going there, but you're going off track here, making a general, we oppose what was done 2 months ago by the Wildlife Board. And you can still say we're not going to support all these because we don't agree with what you originally did, and see how it goes. But we're still got an action item, and it's an agenda. That's the only thing we can vote on. We can vote on is what's on the agenda. So are there any other last comments before Brad makes a motion? Okay.
I'm not gonna.
You're not gonna make it?
Make the motion.
Please do.
Support the four action items that was supported by the LOA and the division. And add the 1.5 multiplier to that motion to support the 1.5 multiplier. I think that's what someone might.
I would do an amendment on that to say that we get rid of the mandatory language and try to be a little more friendly with that. As far as approaching landowners, I think I agree that the
mandatory language referring
One for one.
one for one, yeah.
The mandatory, the state mandate.
the public access.
Yeah, public access.
What do you recommend we do with that?
I just think that should be a better word than mandatory. That's kind of like, to me, it's shoving down people's throat that you're gonna do this no matter what. I just think that there ought to be some language out there that we can use to better not propose, but make it happen.
Jeff, can I tweak your language a little?
Sure.
So they get rid of the mandate of who the house public hunters will be. Not that there will be public hunters. That's part of the rules now. But of the state, get rid of the mandate of the state dictating who the hunters will be.
That's fine.
So, but does that just mean they're gonna let their buddies hunt on their land and not necessarily like anybody that calls up and says, I want access?
Let me back this up a little bit. Let's split this and do two motions because they're not really.
Let's do the first motion.
Yeah, let's do the first one. We have a motion on the table to support the 4 and add a multiplier of 1.5 for all acres, private acres.
I like that.
From Richie. Do we have a second?
Can I ask Richie a question for a potential amendment or reading motion?
You can ask him.
So I agree with 1.5 multiplier or some version of a multiplier, whether it's 1.2 or may not be 1.5. However, I do agree with that. Now with the complexity of how the LOAs can disperse, right? The state can't direct them that you're in the LOA, but we're giving permits. And even though you have cropland, you don't get a tag every year, even though you're 1.5 times what it's worth. So truly they don't get repayment. Would you be opposed to putting something in there that if there is a multiplier granted for that cultivated cropland, that there's proof to the LOA that operator, that landowner is receiving their equitable share in that 1.5 times? Because that's looking out for the landowner. That's my issue.
Every member of the LOA has to address their equitability. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know that the state can address that. That has to be addressed within the LOA. Meaning, if I'm a member of an LOA and I don't think I'm being addressed equitably, that has to be addressed with the LOA.
So 1 in 70 landowners, you're the only one. Then you don't get that equity, but everybody else does because their LOAs follow that rule. Is that fair?
I can actually pull out of that LOA though. I can pull out of that LOA and I can go on to a different definition.
I think they're gonna just do crop litigation.
Yeah. I think Richie and with the, your motion there, I think I can't see where it's going to work with I could see something in there with it needs to be, if you accept the landowner tag, you have to set the public hunt. I don't think your motion, I don't think this is, to say that they're gonna give away 70 landowners or 70 tags up there for elk. And because you accepted one elk tag, you're gonna turn 70 elk hunters loose on your property. There's more damage being done than what the elk is doing. But I think we need to address something that, Richie, that needs to address, I can't see where, that they would, and whatever, accept, there's no, I don't know, maybe it's just in the areas out here, you look at the book cliffs down there and they give them an elk tag, but they go, they let 20 elk hunters that all drop on the property. I think there needs to be something in that motion to pertain to that. I don't know that it'd go with the landowners associations or not, but to turn them loose, every hunter that draws have the right to go on,
No,
section of ground.
that's not how the rule is now.
I thought that's what, well, maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, the rule now is not that the landowners has to allow every public hunter. It's that they have to allow one for one, and and the state will tell them who that hunter is.
Okay, but I misunderstood, I guess. I thought that Chad said that.
I'm describing that correctly, right?
Did I misunderstand?
The way that we read the rule was that all land in the private, all the land that's enrolled in the LOA would be available to all of those. So everybody who has a LOA voucher and everybody that gets assigned access would have the ability.
The state would assign certain hunters access.
Right. So on Diamond, you have
to one tag. How many hunters would have?
If you're part of the LOA, then your land is open to all the public hunters.
So that's what I'm saying. You cannot, that just don't work.
No.
That's why you got a voucher because of your acres.
Yeah, the ones that are given access to the assigned.
So let me try again. So if you, let's just say Diamond Mountain receives 30 land tags. Okay, let's just talk elk. And I'm just throwing. Then you would have to allow those 30 individuals that receive those vouchers. Of course, you would have to allow them access that you sold those vouchers to. Of course, you'd have to allow them access. Then you would have to allow an additional 30 hunters that the state would tell you who those hunters are going to be. You would have to allow those 30 additional hunters on the entirety of that LOA.
But if, for instance, as if the elk are congregated in one area, where's the 30 hunters going to go?
They're going to want to hit that one. So if they're all on your ground, then you're going to.
Well, I don't have them. Don't give me that.
Well, or whoever, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah, elk's congregated on one landowner, then conceivably they could have 60 hunters in that.
Yeah, that's what I thought I understood. You take the majority of the elk on Diamond, and the elk season is on 3 private landowners. And I can see where they was never go to accepting 60.
Well, they won't have it. They won't, under this program, they don't have a choice.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I can see where they would not accept that.
But keep in mind, whether we agree with it or not, that's already been passed by the wildlife board. The access part. 2 options. So we need to.
So we can go with that.
So we have a motion. You still good with that motion?
You guys good with that motion, Dave?
Can you repeat the motion? Because it got
The motion is to approve the 4 items that were recommended by the DWR, plus one of the items that they did not recommend, which is the 1.5 multiplier on all acres.
Could you do it on just irrigated acres?
I believe Richie said on all acres.
All acres.
Just the motion. Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Jeff, second. Okay, I think we're just, Eric, are you present?
Yep.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Joe?
No.
Eric?
No.
Okay, motion fails 3-7. Okay, where do we want to go with it from there? Does that lead to anybody have an inspiration to do another motion?
Jeff, do you want to do your motion?
No, I'm gonna withdraw.
I'll do the motion to accept all four, but and a 1.5 on irrigated acres.
Would you be opposed to going commercial crop land versus just irrigated acreage?
Yes, I think that sounds like a good idea, like commercial crop, like.
Hold on, Chef.
So how?
So what, did you change it?
What's the difference?
I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't we need to clarify? We need to clarify what that is.
I guess what's the difference?
So like corn versus hay or?
Yeah, like alfalfa.
Hay versus pasture.
And water pasture versus culvert hay or corn.
Yeah, it's always get corn,
You're probably irrigated is gonna bring.
you're probably getting into a.
Yeah. Right.
They never kill it off, you know, but it's alfalfa. And they cultivate it. I think you get it.
No, it's already in rules. There's already rules written about how it's.
Yes, my suggestion would be as defined in our rules. We define what.
Irrigated land as defined in the rules.
Cropland, yes.
Oh, cropland as defined in the rules.
It's defined as color.
Sorry if I misinterpreted that. I thought.
Okay.
So, and that's usually just on private land.
Correct.
Yes.
That's part of the
Because-
definition.
Oh, that's part of the definition? Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure because we don't want some sod busting
Good,
going on.
make sure I've got this right, Rebecca.
Because then you gotta have another.
We have a motion to approve the 4 items plus a 1.5 multi. Is that what we're talking about?
That's defined by rule.
As defined by the debate.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Joe?
Yes.
Eric?
No.
That is 5. We have those opposed. 4 opposed. Motion passes 5-4. And I'm sorry, on the first one, I said 10. I forgot you were abstaining on the end, so it is 9 on the previous motion. Okay, we have leaving the RAC to the Wildlife Board that we accept the 4 items that were supported by the division plus a 1.5 multiplier effect on irrigated cropland as defined in the DWR recommendations. Thank you. Any other business? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you for all your valuable input.